This is a video about the revision process. What you see in front of you are three images of the same thing. This is a scroll that was put together by a writer named Jack Kerouac, a great 1940s, 50s, what are called beat novelist. The story goes that he taped a whole bunch of scrolls of paper together and then started typing a novel. And then he took the scrolls, rolled them up, put them in a box, mailed them in, and got it published. Uh, that is the myth of the writer working by himself in the attic, or getting it right the first time and sending it off. Nothing could be further from the truth. When we talk about revision, it's helpful, I think, to talk about how professional writers look at this. And here we've got a couple of them, Bernard Malamud, the great Jewish writer of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and Elie Wiesel, the great Holocaust writer, talking here about how they see revision. You might have read Wiesel's book, Night, when you were in high school. It's a story about his years in concentration camps during World War II. What he says is kind of intriguing to me. Writing is more like a sculpture where you remove, you eliminate in order to make the work visible. And I think that's really what revision's all about. Let's see what some other writers have to say. Dorothy Parker was a 1950s, 60s humorist and one of the really great funny women of the 20th century. And she says, I can't write 5 words, but that I change 7. And I don't go that far, but I think many times I change more words than I originally write. At the bottom here is somebody who's a little bit closer to you in age, someone who might be almost a contemporary, Naomi Shihab Nye. She's a poet and a novelist. And she says this, if a teacher told me to revise, I thought that it meant my writing was broken down car that needed to go to the repair shop. I felt insulted. I didn't realize the teacher was saying, make it shine, it's worth it. Now I see revision as a beautiful word of hope. It's a new vision of something. It means you don't have to be perfect the first time. What a relief. Here's Jack Kerouac. And for a long time, people thought that the only manuscript of the novel was that scroll that I showed you in the first slide. But 20 years ago or so, scholars found this document in a library. And it turns out that, like many people, Kerouac started writing in pencil on a Big Chief tablet, the kind of thing you might have used in first or second grade. So this is, in fact, the first draft of this novel, On the Road. You can see here he's got a title, he's got a date. He starts with chapter 1, and you can see here what he's doing on the page. He's writing and he's revising simultaneously. What's interesting about this is written in pencil, and so he makes his emendations without erasing. He crosses things through. And so kind of like Wiesel says, the remnants of the earlier text remain just in case he wants to go back and make some changes. Here's a picture, by the way, of Kerouac about the time that he wrote On the Road, this great novel. He was a merchant mariner in World War II. He worked his way across the country back and forth after World War II with a friend of his named Dean Moriarty. And they just went back and forth, hitchhiking, stealing cars, working day jobs here and there, because all they wanted to do was stay in motion between the East Coast and the West Coast after World War II. This is the most recent film version of On the Road. It was written, produced about 6 years ago in 2012. And you can see that it was an A-list film with Kristen Stewart and Viggo Mortensen, Kirsten Dunst, a pretty high-level cast. This is Kerouac and his friend Dean Moriarty. Kerouac is over here, and this is Dean Moriarty. And this is a picture from when they were actually doing the activities that turned into the novel On the Road. So if you ever get a chance to read it, it's a really interesting thing. The book itself, that scroll, went to about 20 different publishers, and it was finally picked up by a small firm called Grove Press that was noted for publishing pornography. But they spent about 6 months shaping the book into what was finally published in 1952. Which is maybe 1/3 the length of the original. About 10 years ago, they reissued the volume as if, from Kerouac's scroll with no editing at all. And I bought it because I've read the novel several times. It is unreadable. So if there's anything that demonstrates the power of revision, it is the book On the Road. But that's where the myth of the great writer sitting in an attic writing stuff that nobody can touch comes from, is from Kerouac and writers like him. But that's not how real writers work. Real writers revise. you can probably tell here that these are the hands of President Barack Obama. He was one of the great editors and revisers of our time, I think. This is one of the State of the Union addresses during his second term. And you can see the typed document is what he and his speechwriters agreed to. And then all of these are changes that he's made in his handwriting. You can see by the way he's left-handed. Um, you can tell how much editing he does, and you can see how many changes that he makes as he makes changes and then crosses them out and then adds other words in. This is the kind of thing that real writers do, and this is the kind of thing that I've been encouraging you to do all semester. Most writers say that they write about 11 drafts. Most writers say that they spend the majority of their time revising, not drafting. And most writers work with editors, people like me, or in the real publishing world, professional editors. And I've done that kind of work. I've been a freelance editor for a couple of magazines over time. So for your papers, what do you need to do? The first thing you do is consider how different you are now from what you were at the beginning of the semester when you wrote the autobiography or the observation paper. You know a lot more about writing, you know a lot more about the writing process, you know a lot more about your topic. So the first thing to think about is, how different am I as a writer, and how different do I want to approach this particular subject? And you got to think about the three big things. Why am I telling anybody the story, the purpose? Who's my audience? What do I want them to do? And then how am I going to structure my essay in a way that moves my audience in the direction that I want them to go? Go with the big things first. Read over the assignment sheets. Look at your paper and see what you can add or take out that doesn't help you get to what the assignment sheet asks you to do. Look at the comments that I wrote. If I recommend additional sources, take a look at those sources. And then start thinking about how you're going to reorganize it. In what sequence are you going to put these paragraphs? You know you're going to have a beginning and a middle and an end. So the question is, what fits into those big boxes? If you're incorporating research into a paragraph, think about where that goes. Maybe not at the beginning of the paragraph, but in the middle, after you've stated what the paragraph's topic is going to be. And then you can provide your own sort of analysis or take on that data after you present the information from those sources. But don't put the sources up front. Again, keep looking at what I've suggested. You move around. Look at each paragraph and see if you think it's in the right place still, or if it needs to be removed, if it needs to be shifted to another place, if it needs to be combined with a different paragraph. And don't be afraid to experiment. I do this a lot, where I'll move paragraphs around and save them in different file names. I'll have like SA1, SA2, SA3, and I'll keep all those because it may be that I need to come back to one of those at a later date. Don't throw anything away. I've talked about sources several times in the course already. It's not enough just to assert or quote. You have to include some of the data and some of the examples in order to make sense of what a writer says. And of course, you've got to follow MLA rules to document. Don't just quote, try to summarize and paraphrase, because the audience wants to hear from you, not just a string of things that you've put together. After you get the organization and the content right, take a look at the beginning and the end to see if it does what you want it to do. And then see if you need to revise the body paragraphs in a small or large way to provide the kinds of transitions and flow that you'd like to establish in your paper. Some people start in the middle and work to the ends. Other people start at the beginning and work to the end. Some people start with the end and work to the beginning. There's no one way to do this. And of course, I'm glad to help. After you get the big pieces done, then you can start looking at the small stuff. Look at each sentence and start editing and then proofreading it. Those are two separate activities. Get some help from other people. You've got a discussion board post that's due at the end of this week, so you should take advantage of that to get some input from other people about what you're doing. And then make more revisions, proofread and revise. You cannot proofread enough. Don't get so attached to a paragraph that you're not willing to take it out. Don't get so attached to an approach in an essay that you're not willing to change it. The hardest thing to do is separate your ego as a writer from a paper, but that's something that the revision process will help you do. When it comes to editing, editing and proofreading are really two different things, although we tend to conflate the two. Editing is looking at every word in the sentence and saying, how bad do I need this word? Is this sentence organized in a way that makes sense? Does it connect to the sentence before and the sentence after it? So one of the things that I do a lot in your papers that I mark up is I say, here's some stuff you could take out. Remember, your audience is always looking for a chance to stop reading. So if you have unneeded words, take those out. Look at the comments that I put into your papers, and then when you're revising your papers and adding sentences, think about what exactly is the purpose of this sentence in a paragraph? Why is it there? Is it a topic sentence? Is it a content sentence? Is it some kind of transition to the next paragraph or the next topic? And then you can start thinking about how long that sentence should be or how short. And here are kind of two Mike Burke rules. One is that longer sentences should be content or analysis sentences. Here's this fact from a study, and here's what this means. Shorter sentences are helpful for contrast or surprise or transition. So when you're thinking about sentence length, think consciously about when you should write a long one and when you should write a short one. There's no rule for any of these, but you're the one that's in charge of moving your audience fast or slow through your paper. You decide how long or short a sentence should be. What's the last thing to do? You cannot proofread enough. What I usually recommend is that you print your paper out, read it with a pencil in your hand, and read it out loud. And I guarantee you'll find errors that you didn't notice that you had before. Don't try to proofread on the screen. Send a paper to somebody else in the class if you want some help proofreading. Give it to somebody you trust as a proofreader. Come into the College Writing Center if you have time. Although their job is not to proofread, they will certainly point out areas where some proofreading needs to be done. Okay, so make changes, save it, print it out again, proofread it again, let it sit maybe overnight if you got a chance, and proofread it a third time. And then print it out, make sure that everything's where it should be, and then go back and assemble the file that you need to submit for the portfolio, which has to contain the revised papers, the old papers, and the reflective essay. Finally, here's the last slide. And of course, this is not me in second grade. But I do want to point out that revision should be fun. It should be an activity that you enjoy. It's not meant to be difficult or complicated, but you should see the shape of your paper emerge by the time you're all done. I think all of you are more than capable of being successful with the assignment, and I'm looking forward to reading each one of the portfolios. Just make sure you follow the directions in the assignment sheet, and all of us will be happy.